morning and welcome to Frank's School. I'm going on with, well, this is the 7th year, 82nd day first video. I'm going on with the, the discussion of what has happened in the month of August. I found myself thinking of a Portuguese film, O Nosso Querido Mês de Agosto, Our Beloved Month of August, which is a bit of a strange movie, but nonetheless I find myself thinking of it because August I find is, you know, it's sort of in general, people are trying to squeeze the most out of the summer that they can. Well, I just mentioned that. I'm dealing with the Hong Kongers visit, a visit of almost a month from 3 people from Hong Kong, and I'm continuing with it. This would be the 5th, I think. I think it's the 5th video I've devoted to it. But before I go on, yesterday morphology was the word that escaped me for grammar. Morphology, the way words change by themselves, what part of speech they are, stuff like that, as opposed to syntax. I was looking for that. Now, Cat, don't be a pain. I'd like to erase stuff as I go. I think it'd be a little easier for me. Now, going through these interpersonal relationships, I had said before King, whom I think of as the main character. He is the main character. I described him some and his expectations. Now me, Frank, what about me? What was my relationship? Well, the King sought me out as a teacher, and that I was. I have to wonder sometimes if he didn't think of me a little bit as a sage, in that I'm old. He from watching quite a few of my videos, I think online, he'd come to respect my work. Possibly, I'm not sure, but certainly as a teacher. Once again, I'm going to just change this camera slightly. I usually get it worse rather than better, but I'm going to try. I mean, I don't know about the sage part. I'm going to get rid of that. But it might have been in his thinking. But certainly I was a teacher, and I was ready to fulfill that role. As it turned out, I became a storyteller as part of that whole experience. And I'll tell you more about that a little later as I talk about what developed academically. I don't think of myself as a particularly great storyteller, but I have a lot of stories, and that became my role. Now, I wrote Renaissance Man here. This was as something that at the beginning, King sort of, I don't want to say he obsessed over it, but he was fascinated by this concept of Renaissance Man. He had never heard of it before. As a matter of fact, King, being educated, very well educated in the sciences, in medicine, he's a doctor, surgeon. He felt that he had no education in what I call the humanities. He just knew nothing. He really felt about, you know, literature, art, music, history even, and that idea of a Renaissance man who could be many things. In his case, not only a doctor but also a farmer. I'd have to say he wanted to be that. He latched onto that term, used it a lot at the beginning. So here, you know, I had a surgeon who obviously had to be careful of his hands, out there forking manure out of the barn and rolling the wheelbarrow, and he was into it. You know, his sons too sort of picked up on that sort of concept of the Renaissance man. Well, it gave him a way to have an understanding of me, and he was somewhat fascinated by it. I mean, the word Harvard doesn't go by unnoticed usually, and I think the idea that I had gone to Harvard and was not rich and was not really trying to be rich and was farming, that fascinated him. So, you know, he thought of me as a farmer, and in a way, I'm like a farmer. I'm not, you know, I have a lot of animals. I live on what many people would call a farm. He eventually learned that I was an extremist. At one point he said, "Yeah, you're extreme in everything." That was his comment. As I sort of apologized for my idea about this or that, saying, well, I'm a bit extreme on this matter. And he says, "Yeah, you're extreme in everything." And this idea of degrowth, a degrower, I call myself, this was new to him as well, I think. And if you followed my videos at all or know me at all, it is very deep in me, this awareness of climate change, the work of Greta Thunberg. He had not heard of her. And it gave him plenty to think about, and he thought about that a lot. You know, the matter, for example, that the term has come out recently of flight shame. I saw it just a couple days ago in Sweden is beginning, as the Swedish population appears to be beginning to feel a certain amount of flight shame. You know, Greta Thunberg having sailed to the United States because she swore off flying, and apparently Swedes are not flying as much either. And you know, he said different times, you know, he's flown, halfway around the planet with his two sons. How does that fit in with this? So I was those roles. Oh, here's a caveat. But and now as a host, certainly I was the host. They were my guests, and I was the host, and I was largely doing it myself, and not doing a particularly good job. I was doing the best I could. You know, I was hoping that I was going to be able to do everything, but then the neighbor, fortunately for all of us, I think, the neighbor stepped up. I think in terms of the extent to which I was a host, I think of Admetus or Admetus and Alcestis, that Greek myth, which you could check out if you wanted. At times I felt like I was living that myth. But what really kind of pegged my role in this, I think, eventually I realized I was living out what my son calls a trope, a character trope, I think you might say. I always call it an archetype, and my son since have had some discussion about that difference. There's a certain archetype, a kind of a character that appears in many stories across many lands, especially epic stories. And I don't know if it has a single name, but I can describe that character. An old king. My son once mentioned a retired gunfighter. Yeah, maybe so. I don't know about the fighting part. But an old king who, even though he's old, has to go back into battle. And the two that I can name that might mean something to you are Theoden, or Theoden, in Tolkien's work. He's the king of the Rohirrim, king of Rohan, and Beowulf. At the end of the epic Beowulf, they should not have to be able to do this. They are old. They are retired. They should be finished. But no, they go back into battle. It does not usually end well, that trope, because, and I've had to laugh about that. Well, I'll tell you that in a minute, but I'll tell you why I felt like that. You know, I found myself teaching things that I had not taught in maybe 8 years, and had some of the stuff I'd almost forgotten, some of the details I'd forgotten. In a sense, I was rousing myself up out of retirement, and I'd already worked way late for most teachers before I retired, and then I was rousing myself up after some 8 years of retirement to teach this material again. It was satisfying, and I found that I could do it. But as I was saying, but this trope does not usually end well. The old king goes into battle and usually has some success. Think of Beowulf, but he usually dies thereafter, and as the way that story goes, normally. And you know, I've often thought, well, maybe it's a mercy that he dies, because when you're that old and you go back into battle, the sort of hangover from the battle is going to be so extreme that you might do better to just die, because your body is not in the kind of shape to be doing that. And in any case, I thought of myself sometimes like that, but I survived it, and have recovered, and I have done what I could as that role. Bye for now.